The ends justify the means. So today we are going to talk about a mental model known as Memetics. This is a model that was first introduced by Richard Dawkins, and he coined the term meme, although that term has escaped him at this point. And what it does is you take the logic of evolutionary biology, and instead of applying it to genes, you apply it to memes or cultural units, ideas, stuff of this nature. And it has some interesting implications. So in order to go into this, we need to unpack evolutionary biology a little bit. Okay, evolutionary biology is, the basic idea is that if something gives you a better chance at reproducing, as a characteristic, that characteristic will become more common through iterative generations. And through any one generation, you're not going to see a big difference, but through a lot, you see a large difference. So one particularly good example of this, I forget the name of a volcano, but there was this volcano that before, the area around it was mostly brown, like deserty type area, and there were mice. Mice were mostly brown. Volcano erupts, covers the area in an igneous rock. So now the area is black. Over the course of some 50 years, the mice change color, and now they're almost all black. Okay, their fur, not like covered in the rock. Their fur is actually different. And so what happens, the explanation for this is relatively simple. The ones that were before the eruption, brown on brown, hard for predators to see, right? Birds of prey, largely the predators. So they survived. After the volcano erupts, now the rock is black. Brown on black, light brown, easy to spot. And so through each generation, the ones that were likely to reproduce are the ones that aren't getting eaten by the hawks. And so after some 50 years, now they're all black instead of all brown. Okay? And okay, this is like a very basic way of understanding it. If something's good for the individual, it's probably going to spread. But there are also characteristics that are bad for the individual that increase its reproductive rate, and as a consequence, these become more common. And this is particularly notable in mating strategy type stuff. So there is this long-tailed widow bird of Africa, and the males have a very interesting characteristic in that during mating season, they grow these huge plumed tails, very long. And what these tails, they're also very pretty, but what these tails in practice do is they make it way harder to get away from predators, other birds. Birds of prey also eat them. And so having this adaptation makes it less likely you'll survive. But the females prefer mates with these long plumed tails. And so what ends up happening is the gene is promoted and the tails get longer and more ridiculous looking. Now, the explanation that's often used for this is a male that has a long plumed tail, chances are, other than the tail, he probably has good genes for survival because he's managed to survive despite the tail. This is kind of like the explanation that gets used. And it's a little strange, but it's important focus. The tail is not helping the bird out, except, getting some tail, as it were. So what happened with Dawkins, and I'm not sure if this idea was originally his or if he's just kind of the one who brought it to mainstream, but with the selfish gene, he's like, look, we need to, in order to understand a lot of these things, we need to not look at the individual level, we need to look at the level of the gene. And this is particularly useful for explaining altruism, which has a bit difficult for evolutionary biology, kind of perspectives before, because they would say, oh, it doesn't make any sense, because every organism just acts in a selfish way. And Dawkins is like, no. The genes are being selfish. Of course, it's, he doesn't mean the genes literally have a sort of agency that them being selfish implies, but it's a good way to think about it. And so an example would be, I have a brother. With him, I share about 50% of genes. Okay? If I had a gene that makes me risk my life, that gene's probably not going to help me reproduce. But if that gene makes me risk my life to save my brothers, for example, that won't help me reproduce, but it can help the gene reproduce. So let's take an instance where, let's say my brother has a 100% chance of death if I don't help him out. Okay? And if I help him out, if I don't help him out, I have a 100% chance of survival. I'm getting out of there. If I help him out, I have a 25% chance of dying in this scenario. So, as an individual, I will reproduce less if I save him. So it doesn't make sense from an individualistic perspective, right? But from the perspective of the gene, as an individual, I will produce only 75% of the kids. But as a gene level, he has 50% of the genes I have, right? So if I save him, and he has this gene that leads you to want to save your family members or brothers or people who are close to you, who likely share the same genes, what will happen is you'll get the 75% replication from me as an individual, but by him being saved, you'll also get the 50% by him. So that's 125%. So from the perspective of the gene, if there is a gene that leads to behavior that helps you save people who have the same gene, that will help the gene replicate. Even though it doesn't selfishly help the individual, it selfishly helps the gene. So this altruistic save your brother gene is only helping itself and is being selfish, but it leads to behavior that at the individual level looks altruistic. And so the important thing about this sort of conception is just looking at it like, whatever it is, it's the genes, the only thing that it selects for is the gene's ability to reproduce itself. That's the only thing that gets selected for. It's not going to help the individual live longer. It's not going to help the individual be happier. Nope. It's just your gene's ability to reproduce is the only thing that gets selected for. So, enter the idea of mimetics, which was coined by Dawkins. I think I already mentioned that. Instead of looking at things that we're taking the logic of individual and genes. The individual is like a vehicle for the genes. The genes are like the things that are actually pulling the strings and like making the moves. Okay? With mimetics, individuals, again, just vehicles, unfortunate. And the things pulling the strings are memes or cultural units of like information or ideas. And there's 3 characteristics that make for good memes, make for good spreadability. And that's, first is fidelity. When the meme is reproduced, is it reproduced clearly? To some extent, this just means ideas that are simple are better at spreading than ideas that are more complicated, right? If I tell you a knock-knock joke, you're more likely to remember the knock-knock joke if it's 2 sentences than if it's like 50 sentences or something like that. Or just a regular joke, because all knock-knock jokes are short. Okay? The second is fecundity. How good is the idea, or how many copies are going to get made? So, if I tell you something that is boring and uninteresting, more copies probably aren't going to get made. If I tell you something scandalous, you're more likely to relay that to someone else, right? So gossip is better at spreading. And in particular, if the things that are really good at spreading are stuff that stimulates like our monkey brains, basically. Things that relate to danger, sex, and tribalism. These will spread much better in terms of producing more copies. But it's important to note, they're just good at spreading. It's not necessarily good for us. Okay. And the third is longevity. So how long will the idea stick with you once it's been spread? Because if it's long-standing, you're going to get more fecundity as well. Okay. Often, the analogy that gets used for memes is thinking of them as a virus, which, if you think about it, that sort of way of thinking of memes has better fecundity because it's better at spreading. You relate it to danger, and so it's, as an analogy, it serves better than others. There's, I think it's Richard Brodie is his name, wrote this book called Virus of the Mind, and it's a book about memes. Pretty good. But this idea of spreading it as a virus also is good for capturing this vehicle driver situation where the ideas that are being spread to you might not necessarily be good for you. So there are a couple examples I can think of stuff that's particularly good at spreading, but may not be good for you. So stuff that's related to danger and stuff that's related to family, often really good at spreading. So when the kids are in danger, good spread. So vaccines cause autism, for example. Independent of whether or not that's accurate, which my understanding of the literature is it's not, that's the type of idea that's going to spread really well. Because you're saying there's this insidious thing that's putting the kids in danger. These kids share genes with you if you're looking at a gene perspective. And it needs to be stopped. Another one that is a particularly striking example for me that's kind of similar in this same vein is razor blades in the Halloween candy. And you see this like on the news all the time. You hear it all the time. Parents, check your kids' candy. People put razor blades in candy. I've actually looked for evidence of this, for a single case of this happening. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but I was completely unable to find any evidence of a razor blade ever being found in a child's candy. Okay, but we hear about it every Halloween. As an idea, it's easy to understand why that idea spreads, even if the risk is basically zero, because I can't find any evidence of it ever having happened. It's perhaps not something you should be concerned about because it hasn't happened, but it's good spreading. I'm even qualifying whether or not you should be concerned, even though, to my knowledge, it's never happened. Like, locking up your cleaning materials is probably a more important thing to worry about. But it spreads because it's related to danger in the kids. And it doesn't spread because it's a good idea. Because, as an idea, if I can't find any evidence of it having occurred, it's really not common, whatever it is. And so, another thing that I think about is tribalism stuff is really good at spreading. So I think about polarization, and often I think that what happens with, I'm going to talk about in the United States, conservatives versus liberals. What seems to be the case is that in conservative echo chambers, they form a caricature of a liberal that doesn't really represent a liberal. And then but it's a caricature that is dangerous to conservative ideas. Okay? This caricature is going to spread much better as an idea of what a liberal looks like than like this like moderate, relatively reasonable liberal. Because it pokes at all the things. It pokes at danger. It pokes at tribalism. It's going to be more conducive to spreading. And so you get a lot of conservatives have this caricaturized ideal of what a liberal looks like. Same thing on the other side. The liberals, they make a caricature of conservatives that's dangerous to liberal ideas, and then they hold it up like this is what the general conservative looks like, and it's just not true. And then they base a lot of their thinking off of that. And so it's easy to see why this happens, because the more dangerous looking version or idea about them is easier to spread, right? Because it has more fecundity. Also, these caricatures tend to be oversimplistic and not nuanced, whereas most people have nuanced opinions and like somewhat complex opinions, right? So the fidelity of nuance is a lot lower than the fidelity of simplistic, like, evilized version. Okay? And then there's longevity. It's really easy to remember specific, like, anecdotes of someone just being nutter about stuff. And so it spreads. So ideas that spread tend to be the ones with the most self-propagating qualities. Not ideas that are true, accurate, or ideas that are useful. And I think this is important to emphasize within this model, that this is really the use of the model. Because it allows you to put this, like, stop filter when you're consuming ideas, where you stop and you ask yourself, okay, is this idea accurate? Is it useful? Or is it just good at spreading? It's a tool for resisting, like, a sort of mainstream, I don't even want to use the word mainstream, but perhaps it's useful for what's going on in the mainstream is all velocity of spread and not quality of ideas. And quality ideas are sometimes, they don't have the three qualities that make for a good meme, right? That make for a good spread. They are sometimes really complicated. And so reproducing them in a articulate way is difficult. So the fidelity's low. They are often really uninteresting. So an example is, like, there's a lot of like magic pill type products out there where you, like, take this and it'll change your life. It'll make your life so good. The unsexy truth is that, like, walking every day, having a regular sleep schedule, drinking a lot of water, and making sure you're not deficient in vitamins and minerals are all really effective for feeling good, having good health, having good outcomes. But they're unsexy. The fecundity on such ideas, such really basic things, doesn't spread anywhere nearly as well as the latest gossip on the latest Who, right? Because they don't press the buttons of people in terms of spreadability. It's a lot easier to be, in apocalypse mode because, there's just so much stuff that's going on right now where, like, conservatives are in apocalypse mode about, like, people crossing the border, and, like, liberals are in apocalypse mode, people aren't taking vaccines. And it's like, there's probably actually just more useful ideas, and more true ideas, although true is kind of, like, weird, out there, but they're not the ideas that have very good fecundity. They're, like, not as good at spreading as, like, some outrage, and just being mad about stuff, when, like, man, having a regular sleep schedule actually just, like, improves, like, all markers of health. They're, like, I think it was, like, there's a recent study that showed, like, people who take, like, 2,000 steps versus, like, 18,000 steps a day. This was, like, a meta-analysis. Meta-analysis doesn't have high fecundity as a word, but, like, it was this meta-analysis of it was more likely it decreased your all-cause mortality walking 18,000 steps instead of 2,000 by more than not being a smoker or not being obese. Like, being sedentary was, like, a bigger driver of mortality than either being obese or being a smoker. And so, but, like, walking's not sexy, so it's not going to spread. And ideas that don't stay in someone's mind for a long time, so ones that aren't provoking, like, a strong emotional response, also bad at spreading. And so you have this thing where oftentimes you can ask yourself, okay, when you're thinking throughout the day, the types of stuff you're thinking about, am I just thinking about stuff that's sensationalistic, or am I thinking about stuff that is like actually useful to me. Another thing is that clearly understanding one's values, if you're clear about what your values are, you can compare your ideas to your values as a sort of strategy for not being, overly slave to the memes. And so let's talk about how Mimetics relates to a couple other models or ideas as a bit of an outro. This video is largely inspired by a blog post I did, and this is what I do in the blog post is I compare one model to another and I talk about it. So first one that comes to mind is free will. If you take Mimetics to its logical conclusion, humans become like actually vehicles, like this an inanimate type of thing, and the drivers are just all memes at this point, because the memes have taken over in terms of what's important. Culture is more important than genetics at this point, if you're using this perspective model, and they're just driving everything that really happens, what we think, the perspectives we make, which inform our actions. And you look at it, the end result is that there's no free will, and this is why. Because ideas are just good at spreading because they're good at spreading. We don't really think good ideas, we just get spread, ideas that are high fidelity, high fecundity, and high permanence. Permanence isn't the word, but it's something like that. It's one I can't remember, apparently, so it must not be a good word. So free will is something that this covers. There's this model of the looking glass self in which we construct our identities largely based on how we think other people perceive us. And if you look at Mimetics, you notice some trend that might be alarming, which is we tend to notice danger a lot more. In the case of social, we tend to think what social danger is like humiliation or people thinking bad of you. So if you construct your identities based on what other people think, and you are prone to thinking ideas that relate to danger, in this case, like social humiliation, the identities we construct of ourselves might be to somewhat informed too much by worrying what other people think about us. Right? Same with, there's another model called the Rosenthal effect or the Pygmalion effect, which is what you think is true tends to become true. If you are focused on ideas related to like sensationalism or danger, in terms of your reality, these might manifest more. And I don't mean manifest in the like law of attraction secret type sense. I mean like in your subjective experience of your reality, you might experience your reality as being more dangerous than it is. Not your reality actually being more dangerous. And another one I think about is social media. This model is really good for kind of understanding why it's the bottom of the brainstem stuff that spreads really well on social media. I don't think social media is innately like bad, as much as I think that it's really conducive for increasing the velocity, and the types of ideas that spread aren't necessarily the ones that are the most useful to us as individuals, or entertaining, or even that. They're just ones that are good at spreading. And so, these are ones related to sex, danger, polarization, and like this types of stuff. And so when you're looking on social media and you're thinking of maybe sharing something or just kind of analyzing like what it is you're consuming, it's important to keep in mind, or if you're using strategy based on this model, something you can keep in mind is that if something's making you outraged and that's making you respond or share, it's hitting the points of being high fidelity, right? And if it's really simplistic, then it's also high fecundity. And if it really gets you mad, then it's high permanence. Can't remember the word. It's very easy to take a look at it and be like, okay, if this is pressing all the good memes button, I should be more critical of if this idea is actually good. Also, often, like, in terms of fidelity, often the idea that gets expressed that's overly simple is this person or group is evil or just bad. That's just such an easy cop-out idea to spread. And it's either you have to think that, like, all of the others are bad and all of your side is good, or, like, it's just an absurdity. But it's a very easy idea to spread because it's so simple. Like, these people are just bad, is easier than being like, okay, well, this person has the perspective that I don't agree with, but, like, are they overall net good on the world, or, like, that type of thing. And just, like, going through some sort of checklist of parameters of thinking of a person's bad or not before actually, like, judging them as bad, or, like, taking stuff way out of context is, like, way easier to do on the fidelity scale than, like, trying to, like, look for context. And so, if you're thinking of ideas in terms of their spreadability, I think it makes you less susceptible to being, like, roped into these sorts of attention traps, really. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is the ends sometimes justify the memes. If you're trying to express yourself or you're trying to express an idea, then it's really good to be hitting those three things, right? It's good to make the idea really simple. Okay? Having a really complex and nuanced discussion. I think this is something scientists get wrong a lot. Is, like, often they start with qualifying why their perspective, like, may not be 100% accurate, but, like, it looks like it's accurate, and, like, this other factor has an effect, and, like, it's offset by this, and you've already probably stopped paying attention to what I'm saying as I'm, like, just doing this sort of explanation, right? The messaging, you got to keep it simple. It's the economy, stupid. Second, high fecundity. And perhaps this is a bit of an immoral type of thing, but if you can insert sex or danger into your message, it's going to spread really well. Like, one example is there's, like, this line from a commercial that I just, like, can't get out of my head. So in a sense, it's a good meme, but I can't get it out of my head because I think it's especially absurd. And so it was like selling coins or something, and they say act now to avoid future regret, and it's like they're not even trying to conceal the how they are creating a need in order that they might fill it. And it just appeals to, like, this danger of, man, I really don't like experiencing regret, but makes it better at spreading. It sells stuff. So if you're trying to sell your idea, relating it to danger or polarization makes the idea spread better. And if your idea is really good, sometimes the ends justify the memes. Almost forgot about the permanence bit. What's the word? I have it written down here. Longevity. I won't remember it very long, but there it is. So, as a model, I like this a lot. I think there are potentially, like, some downsides, which if you get, like, overly... I see this model as better as, like a critical model for, pumping the brakes a little bit on some ideas, more so than I do think it's a good constructive model in terms of, like, building up ideas. Also, my general perception with the evolutionary biology perspective is if you apply it to everything, you get a really dark view of the world. So using it only thinking of things in terms of evolutionary biology, I think is not a good look. But overall, I like this idea. I mentioned Richard Brodie, I think it's Richard Brodie, his book Virus of the Mind earlier. That covers mimetics. There aren't too many books on mimetics. That's one of them. It's interesting. He uses the analogy of virus, and you get infected with ideas. Obviously, this terminology is good memes in terms of spreadability. There's also this book called Mimetics by this guy, who I'm not going to try and pronounce his name because I'm not good with I think it's Japanese. This book's translated. It's a very thin book, but I think it's really good. He does delve into some of the darker free will implications with Mimetics. So it's a bit more abstract, philosophical, but again, pretty accessible, thin. Readability, it's pretty good. There's some like weird translation things. As far as discussion goes, does anyone have any examples of ideas that are really good at spreading, but are particularly not useful, not true, or just don't do anything really except spread? I like hearing examples. My favorite's the razor blade in the candy one, because I was completely unable to find any example of this ever occurring, but it comes up every Halloween. And so it seems like something that just doesn't reflect reality at all, but is like, you can't get rid of it. Longevity is infinite. I remembered the word. Anyways, if anyone can think of examples like that, that'd be cool to hear, and have a good one.